All right, hello everybody. Welcome to Unbiased America. I am Will Ricciardella of Unbiased America on Facebook. We have here today Michael Lee from Being Liberal Logic and Being Classically Liberal. He's back. It looks like he is in an interrogation room. I don't want to know. Guy does some weird things. We'll talk about that later. We also have Matt Palumbo from Being Classically Liberal and Being Liberal Logic, Unbiased America.
All of them.
I'm just going to add him to TAC, to the Analytical Conservative, for the hell of it. Also being Minarchist, so you can say that you actually have a presence on every page in Facebook.
I'm down.
And with us today, we have our special guest who did some work with Matty on a paper. His name is called Tim Hsiao, and he is a philosophy professor at what's the school again? Florida Gulf something or other.
Florida Gulf Coast University.
That's what I was gonna say. Sorry, I can't. All those words just don't fit in my head.
It's Dunk City, Will. How can you forget Dunk City?
Yeah, we're mainly known for that basketball thing.
It is Dunk City. That is true. That's why I was trying to remember it and I couldn't. I kept getting where Isaiah Thomas coached in my head, FIU or wherever the hell that was. But your paper. Let's talk about that, Tim. And the case is, I believe, what was it? The title was The Morality of Gun Ownership?
The title was The Moral Right to Keep and Bear Firearms. So it was a paper that we wrote around over a year ago. Originally, it was me and my colleague Cesar Bernstein, who's at Oxford. We decided to write a paper on the morality of gun ownership, something that people haven't talked about. It's mainly from like a utilitarian perspective, and we wanted to offer a more deontological perspective. And while writing the paper, we decided that we needed more statistics, more empirical stuff. We took Matt on because that was up his alley. And then we submitted the paper, and then much to our surprise, it was accepted just like that. Normally when you go through the peer review process, you usually send a paper in. It gets sent out to blind reviewers. Those reviewers request changes, and then you make those changes, it's reviewed again, and then you get a decision. Our paper was just accepted without any further review like that. So I guess apparently to the editors it was a good paper.
Okay. Now, when you're talking about the moral right to gun owners, why does that matter? When you say right, what does that mean? I mean, it says it in the Declaration of Independence, we are endowed with certain unalienable rights, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which meaning property. But I can get into why they didn't put property, which is obviously that if you have a right to property, that the government somehow should provide you with property. They didn't want to get that confused, so they didn't add. They just put the pursuit of happiness, and property rights are written into the Constitution. But what does it mean when we have these rights? Where do these rights come from? Why is it a moral right to own a gun?
Right. So we distinguish between several types of rights. You have what's called a natural right that's grounded in your being human, and then you have what are called legal rights that are invented by government, created by governments, rights that don't have any independent existence of their own. And we argue that there is a right to own a gun that's derived from the natural right of self-defense. So as a human being, you have a right to life. That right to life entails the right to defend your life, and from that we derive the right to use a tool in self-defense. And since a gun is a very effective tool in self-defense, there is a very strong prima facie right to own a gun.
So, just to clarify, the right to own a gun is tertiary from your right to liberty. You have this right to liberty, therefore you have a right to defend that liberty.
Not so much liberty, although you could give that argument. It's mainly the right to life and then the right to self-defense.
Right.
Now, you could also make a liberty-based argument that...
I'm sorry, I meant to say right to life. I apologize.
Yeah. But you could make a liberty-based argument. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with owning a gun, so there's a defeasible presumption in favor of gun ownership. You could make that argument.
You could make the argument that from liberty stems sovereignty, and as a sovereign I decide to arm myself. I think... and as the sovereign, I get to decide. I have dominion over myself as to whether or not, as a sovereign actor, I am able to arm myself against actually my government, who, if I act as a sovereign, they work through me, and I keep it to protect myself from them. But I guess you can get into that all day.
Yeah, I mean, the self-defense argument usually has two prongs. So first is individual self-defense, so self-defense against criminals, and then there's the self-defense against rogue states, against the government. So those can be combined into a cumulative case self-defense argument. But most philosophers who have, and very few philosophers have surprisingly written on this. You'd think that, given that the debate over gun rights is something that concerns ethics, you'd think that many philosophers would have written on this, but actually it turned out very few have written on it. Most philosophers who do write in favor of gun ownership tend to focus on the self-defense against criminals and not so much against the government, although you do have I believe one philosopher who writes using that argument. Okay, and you started this paper as talking, like you said, you needed somebody to give you the empirical framework, and this seems to be a case with a lot of things, certainly like built on libertarian and conservative principles, that liberty, free markets, things that are espoused and that are tertiary to other rights, tend to be empirically better than the alternatives that actually trample on these natural rights. It seems to be I always wanted an explanation for that. Why are free markets are better? We know that they're better empirically, and that also stems from liberty, my right to engage in voluntary association and so on and so forth. But these things seem to always add up with whatever our natural rights are. Is that a coincidence? Or is it the purpose of human beings to have these things? Does that promote best human flourishing in an economic and political landscape? Right, I mean, so it's not a coincidence that certain social and economic policies tend to lead to actually better outcomes when you look at it from an empirical perspective. And that's the explanation for that is because the foundation on which these policies are built, they get human nature right. They get a accurate view about what we are,
what our flaws are,
and how we relate to other people. And so it's not a surprise that when you actually apply these views, that it tends to lead to a better set of consequences when compared to other views.
Right. So these rights, a lot of these metaphysical rights or natural rights, have generally pinned down human nature. They're not only the good things about human nature, but also the flaws in human nature, and have created these systems over time through experience that best harness these good features and limit the costs of the negative features. Would that be accurate to say?
Yeah, I mean, so you start from this theoretical perspective, and when you apply it, you look at the actual consequences, and the fact that certain social policies, certain economic policies lead to better human well-being is a confirmation that we're starting from the right perspective, that we're getting human nature right, and that we in fact have a correct grasp on how reality is.
All right, let me get Mike in here, and then I'll get to Matt on the empirical data. Mike, you're a conservative libertarian. I would consider you. We have the same views on things. Like when you look at the moral case for gun ownership, how would you validate that without the use of statistics from a libertarian standpoint or libertarian conservative standpoint?
The moral reason?
Right. Gun ownership as a right. We say it's a right, and it is a right. But how would from a contemporary libertarian standpoint, what would they say is the reasoning that it is a right, other than that the tautology itself that it is a right? You know what I mean?
I think he hit it on the head. I think most libertarians, and I myself, would argue that you have a right to self-defense, and whether that be self-defense against criminals, someone intruding into your home, self-defense against a rogue state like your own government, and one thing he didn't mention is also self-defense against a foreign invader. If for whatever reason there was a foreign invasion, you should be able to have firearms to fight off any sort of army, whether it's your own government or someone else's government. So I think most moral arguments, without using any sort of statistics whatsoever, without bringing in any of the other stuff, would center around your right to self-defense. That's the bottom line.
So are you saying that guns, if it was even, let's say the data showed that guns, where there's more guns in country, where there's more guns, there's more deaths, there's more murders with guns, you're saying that there's still a moral case and an argument that people should be able to keep their guns?
Yeah, I've actually said before, it's actually a coincidence that statistics back up my point, because I honestly don't think that you can make a case to ban guns, even if for some reason you could prove that guns were the cause of the violence. So I think that the moral reason to keep guns trumps any sort of possible problems they cause. There's things in this world that cause problems, and freedom is a little messy sometimes, but that doesn't mean that you ban anything that can cause problems. Free speech can cause problems as well. So I've said a million times, even if we could prove that guns are the cause of some of the violence, then you'd still have to somehow trump the moral argument that the right to keep and bear arms is important.
Now that leads to my next question, though. As a libertarian, don't they look at everything through a cost-benefit structure? If the costs of gun ownerships outweigh the benefits, shouldn't we ban them? From a purely libertarian standpoint, if it's the other, like, you've made the moral case and you've done quite well, but a libertarian would usually go through from a cost-benefit analysis, right?
I don't know. I think it kind of depends on what kind of libertarian you're talking about. I think there's kind of there's constitutional libertarians who I think would side with me because they agree with the framework of the Bill of Rights. There's libertarians who don't value the state at all. So if you don't, more leaning toward anarchy. So there couldn't be no law banning guns, even if from a cost-benefit analysis.
Right.
So maybe there's a subsect of libertarian that would use government force, but that would be kind of a confusing moral argument they'd have to have with themselves, I think.
Right. Okay. And Matt, on the data and the data in your paper.
Yeah.
What does the data show? Is it showing that, I mean, like, if I look at it just purely from a standpoint within the context of the American experience, the south side of Chicago has some very strict gun laws. It really should be, if I look at it from the liberal perspective, the safest place on the face of the earth.
Actually,
I'd rather live in Afghanistan.
I was just thumbing through statistics, and Chicago was the example I found, and it was like, I think they had like a 19-year total handgun ban. There was only 3 years out of those 19 where they actually had a lower homicide rate than before lower firearm homicide rate than before they enacted that gun control measure, and the percentage of murders committed with firearms actually increased from like 40% of all murders to a peak of 95%. So almost twice as many more than twice as many murders in some years were used committing guns than when guns were legal there. And once they started allowing, when they started loosening up guns regulations, murder rates have fallen there since then. Obviously, it's still very strict, but not as strict as it once was. And I do think the cost-benefit analysis is also important within discussing morality because I think we all agree there's a right to self-defense, but I think it was Alan Dershowitz tried to stretch that and say, well, what about owning nuclear weapons? Can't you defend yourself with those? So I think cost-benefit analysis is important for that reason. Obviously, if one person misuses the nuke, there's going to be disastrous consequences. With guns, there's obviously consequences, but there's a lot more opportunity for benefit.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would make the argument against Dershowitz saying that a nuclear weapon obviously has externalities that would be...
Yeah.
I
mean, guns do too, just not to that ridiculous extent.
Right. No, guns do, but but not to the costs of, say, a nuclear weapon.
Yeah.
Moreover, the problems you would have with other nation states if one human being
could have
yeah. So I mean, or a tank, or certain things like that. I mean, I would actually make an argument that people should be allowed to have a tank, but maybe
I'm all for tanks.
Or actually armed aircraft, but whatever, I don't know.
I mean, in certain cases, we do support arming people who need appropriate weaponry to resist their country. So, I mean, it's not that implausible.
No, and I mean, we've used. In the past we've used ships like passenger ships to ship cargo to warheads or ammunition to nations under the radar, so on and so forth. So it's not necessarily out of the question, I don't think. Where was I going? I'm sorry. Oh, we went to the numbers. So Matty, we did. I think on Unbiased America we ran these numbers, and it was showing that homicide rates in countries with more guns are actually less than other countries that have stricter or no gun control at all. Is that true?
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, the only overall murders are lower. Countries with more guns may have more firearm homicides because that becomes the weapon of choice, but the overall murder rate is lower. And John Lott actually even makes that point in his book, More Guns, Less Crime. Like, he accepts that. You might have more firearm crime or firearm murders, but overall, a net benefit, it's going to be reduced. So that's what you got to focus on, not just guns.
So my question then is, has anybody ever looked at murder rates before guns ever came on the scene? I mean, was there no violence?
There's a book by Steven Pinker called, I think it's called The Better Angels Are in Nature. I haven't read it entirely, but I think the stat was like 100,000 years ago, in the first eon of human existence, the murder rate was like 500 per 100,000 people, and today in most European nations it's about 1.
Yeah.
In America, where it's it's so violent here, it's like 5. So
no, I mean, we look at our cult. We have this culture of violence and everything's. Well, what were cultures before?
Yeah.
I mean, look at the culture of violence during World War II.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? I mean, we've made some leaps and strides, and that gets to the other question. I mean, even since 1993, murder rates have been declining astronomically.
It's like half. Yeah.
Why is it that we have this perception that we have some sort of violent culture?
Yeah, I mean, I think that most of the decline in murder rates since then is just doing, I think it was attributed mainly to a decline in like crack cocaine usage. Wasn't it the crack cocaine epidemic was the reason it was artificially high, and then it's come down from that, or? Could
be. I mean,
all right, that was the explanation I heard.
No, but I mean, why is over the last 20? I mean, even during that time, we didn't have the rhetoric of guns that we have now, when it's been declining, as you say, by half.
Yeah.
And let me. Why is it that people are saying, "Oh, we have this culture, guns and death"?
Yeah, it's like the media.
Liberals might tell you that it was because of the assault weapons ban of 1994.
Yeah, I know, right? That's what it was.
Funny story. There was actually on Dianne Feinstein's website. She actually had a link to like a study. It was an issues part of her website talking about like the assault weapon ban, and she had a link to a study which claimed that like the assault weapons ban reduced firearm murders. I can't remember what the rate was. Let's just say it's 10%. So I went to the actual study, and it was like, while we observed a 10% decline, we cannot attribute it completely to the assault weapons ban.
Right. So, no. Yeah, it's an 11-year gap.
It said the exact opposite of what she actually claimed it said.
Let me pose that same question to Tim. Why, like, we have this anti-gun rhetoric today, and I mean, is it the media that's sensationalizing a lot of these stories? We've seen that the gun rates have declined, that homicide rates in the United States they're not high at all. They've been declining. Where is this rhetoric coming from, and why are people saying, "Oh, we need to ban guns"? Is it because that they don't like? Is it they don't like the perceived right to own guns? They don't trust the individual per se, maybe on the left? Or that they just want government to do more things. What do you think, Tim?
It's funny whenever I see politicians urging more calls for gun control. You look at the statistics on gun sales, and whenever you have a big call for gun control, gun sales spike. And so it seems that when people call for gun control, it's almost counterproductive. It accomplishes the very opposite of what they want to accomplish. And as for the rationale behind calls for gun control, I've tried to understand why people who are against guns are against guns, and the best reason that I can come up with is basically just, I guess, a personal dislike of guns. I mean, I have some friends who are opposed to gun ownership on, I guess, statistical grounds, but for the most part, people just don't like guns, and they don't want people to have them.
I think it's a broader issue, and maybe I'm a conspiracy theorist, or maybe sometimes I get carried away. I know some of you guys on the panel might think that, but the same people that don't like the right to bear arms or the right to gun ownership don't like property rights. You know what I mean? Like, it's the same. They don't like a lot of these things that are, that we consider natural law or natural rights or metaphysical rights, whatever you want to call them. That these same group of people just dislike that. That I think they see that through government the individual can be perfected, rather than, as I see it, that people not necessarily through government. There's systems that are more adept to human flourishing that have little to do with government. Would you agree?
Sure. I mean, one explanation might be that the government doesn't want you to have guns because they want to rein in control. And if you have guns, you're able to resist the government. You're able to resist this idea of the big state who wants to regulate your life. Now, I mean, that might be a plausible reason for why you have these almost these calls for gun ownership, which seem to be reasonable, but there's always like a prohibitionist mindset behind that wants to get rid of all guns and confiscate them. That might be one reason why. I just haven't seen any actual studies done on the motivations behind that. So while it might be plausible, I can't really...
No, it's clearly conjecture. I mean, that's really all we can engage in. It's hard to get empirical stats on any of that stuff. But I always find it odd that, you know, in the same respect that I found it odd that things that centered around natural law seem to be empirically better, I find it odd that these people... Like, go ahead, Mike.
Well, I mean, you can see this play out, you know, it speaks a little to about... I had an argument one time about guns with someone from Chicago who he was saying some things in the argument that were really confusing, some of his misconceptions about guns, and then he actually admitted later in the argument that he had never actually fired a gun in his life. And so you can see where some of these misconceptions would come from. If you look at where the gun control or where the anti-gun rhetoric comes from, it's usually from cities where there's not many guns. If you look at people that were military personnel, people from rural areas who do a lot of hunting or just happen to have a lot of family members with firearms, most of these people that are familiar with guns, know how guns work, have been around them before, don't have a problem. It's usually people that have never fired one or maybe even touched one in their life.
Right. So that they see it as just a scary object.
Yeah, it's foreign to them. They don't even really... And, you know, I've seen this play out in Europe, too. There's a lot of strict gun control in Europe, and I lived there for a while. And people they're so amazed by the fact that you can have guns in the United States because they've never even touched one before, and they think that's the scariest thing ever, that people have guns, but most of them have never even touched one in their life. They wouldn't even know how scary it is.
Right. That's interesting. You know, all this talk about guns, you know, we can dispel these myths a million times over. I just, you know, it doesn't seem to matter. And this goes to you, Tim. I don't know how many times I've seen studies that rebut most of the claims made by generally leftists about gun ownership, and it seems that the left is moving further to the left on guns. If you see Hillary Clinton, she sees this as you know, a point where Bernie Sanders is vulnerable. Obviously, he voted against the Brady bill, and she's moving further to the left of Bernie Sanders on the gun issue. It doesn't matter what facts you bring up to these people, what moral claims you make. Why is that, Tim? I don't understand. You can make the moral case. You can make the empirical case. You could show them 10 ways from Sunday. Facts don't seem to matter. Does this go to a broader thing of if truth is subjective? What is truth?
I mean, I think that liberals, for the most part, at least the gun control movement, the people behind the gun control movement, have always been either explicitly or implicitly for some type of total prohibition. So it's not as if they're going more to the left. They've always been that way. And indeed, there was an article written about 10, 15 years ago by Gary Kleck in which he documented all of the various statements, the press releases, the briefs in which advocates of the gun control movement give statements to the extent that they want to ban guns altogether. And so this has always been around.
Well, that's what it is. No, but that's late. I mean, that's within the past 30 years, I would say. I don't know if I would go back 50 or 60 years and say Democrats wanted to ban guns. I don't know. I think the Democrat Party is radically different than it was under Kennedy, as it is today under, you know, Barack Obama and the Clintons. I think there has been a radical movement over the last 30 years, certainly with guns, and I think it becomes more and more radical where it's to the point we need sensible gun laws. They're just saying we need to get rid of guns is essentially their goal. There is no other.
You saw a lot of, I guess, societal changes around the time people started calling for gun control. So it was not just guns; it was attitudes just toward about everything, the family, other social issues. So it's probably what explains this whole animosity about guns. Probably is rooted more in ideological differences. Between...
Do you think that comes from academia, mostly from intellectuals?
Oh well, I mean certainly. I mean most academics today are left wing, and you can barely find a conservative in academia.
You're in academia. Do you work with any conservatives or people that think, perhaps, as a philosophical Thomist, do you have anybody that thinks the same way as you, or are they mostly, certainly postmodern? And I'm not talking about just your philosophy department. I'm talking about your political science department as well. Do you see a lot of postmodernists there? And in your sociology department, obviously.
Sociology departments, certainly. Philosophy departments, they tend to be left-wing, but they aren't postmodernist per se. They tend to be more, they believe in
Pragmatists?
a realist theory of morality, a realist
Okay.
theory of truth, but they take a more leftist approach to it. And in the sociology department, certainly you have a bunch of postmodernists there. Economics departments tend to be more liberal, right-wing, at least in my experience. So it's probably just differences between departments in some of these areas.
Right, because Matt and I, Matt and Mike and me, we have our pages and we run, we look at things empirically and we post these things. And you guys can back me up on this. And it doesn't matter. I've seen Mike engage in a lot of debates. I've seen Matty engage in a lot of debates. And you can bring any facts, stats, certainly on race issues. You know what I mean? Inequality issues as far as it relates to economics, things with guns. And it doesn't. You guys can attest to this. It doesn't matter.
All it does is get you assaulted by Francis McCloskey. So.
All they do is that they'll attack your character. They never change their minds. They literally facts don't matter. I don't understand why that is. Where does that come from? Is that
because you guys aren't unbiased?
That can't just be ideology. I mean, can that just the ideology triumph over fact and win that decisively? I mean, or is it something? Is it a philosophical, methodological position, Tim?
Well, I mean, I just can't for the life of me understand people who just you try to reason with them. You do your best. You give the arguments. You be respectful to them, and after all that's done, all they can do is insult you. And not all liberals are like this. I have some liberal friends who will listen, but for the most part, my experience with your average on-the-street liberal is that no matter what you throw at them, they just won't listen. And perhaps it's because they're personally committed to the view, they just don't want to leave it, and so they close themselves off while pretending to be behind the facts.
Right.
That might be one reason. I mean, another reason might just be they're just stubborn or ignorant, or I've tried to understand them, and so I really don't understand how the liberal mind works.
Well, I have a question for Tim.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
This is something that I would like to ask you, just because from a philosophy standpoint, we're talking about we're throwing evidence at liberals. They don't seem to care. Is there anything in your experience, in your studies, as maybe a better way to argue with people? I've heard of the Aristotic method.
The Socratic method?
Yeah, the Socratic method. Sorry. There's but from a philosophy standpoint, is there a better way to argue with people? I mean, I throw facts at the wall. I can throw you. This is peer-reviewed. 99% of economics.
I've seen it a million times. I've seen it.
And they're like, so I don't care. I don't care about your facts.
Let me give Tim.
Is there a better way to argue?
Let me give Tim some background, though. Mike's arguments are extremely logical. I mean, he'll rip you apart. He'll hit you piece by piece, and he'll give you an extremely logical answer. And I was going to bring this up before you did, Mike. I've seen this a million times. The person will respond with absolute nonsense, and Mike will have to sometimes repeat it or build off of the same argument. And for he'll stay at it, and he stays more calm than I would. By that time, I'd be like, I'm done talking to you. But he has a good point. Like, I don't think there's another way to do logic. I think there's one truth. There's one, you have one sound argument. I don't think that you can really deviate. But he has a point. Is there a better way to argue? I mean, we talked about this with that one show with the Blue Republican. Remember, guys?
Yeah.
Like, is there a better way? Is it the attitude when we argue? What is it? We can't get through to these people.
I think it depends on who you're trying to convince, though, Will. I mean, even if you can't convince someone you disagree with, but you're using logic, and the people who see the debate are obviously going to be more inclined to take your side. So
the thing is, the truth matters. You know what I mean? The truth matters to me. And I think it should matter to everyone else. I don't really care about your ideology. I don't care about how you feel. I don't care what happened to your mom or your uncle or your brother. That doesn't change the facts. You know what I mean, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, it's a learning experience, right? It differs for each person, and depending on the person, you might have to tailor your approach. If you are arguing with somebody who is very aggressive, who's like a bulldog, then throwing the facts out there, being assertive, might work. And I guess I should also note, rare to convince somebody on the spot. You almost never do that.
I agree with you.
It's almost always, you throw a seed of doubt somewhere, and it has to take time to germinate. But, whenever I try to have a discussion with somebody, even if I know I won't convince them, I will usually try to, convey a point, get them to think about it, and not so much get them to change their mind on the spot, but get them to acknowledge, hey, there are good arguments for the conservative point of view, and maybe these arguments are worth taking seriously.
Right. Now, I'm going to get all you guys in on this one, and I know you got, like, Mike and Matt understand my argument style, and I've talked about it on the show before. Look, if I'm talking to somebody, I've studied, I've sacrificed to know a lot of the things that I've known, and it's come at a pretty big cost, okay? And I don't ever really discuss things that I don't know, and I know for sure Matt and Mike are the same exact way. I know when Matt discusses something out of his realm, he'll be like, I don't know. Mike does the same thing. They tend to discuss things that they know, which I entirely respect. I do the same. So we'll engage somebody, and if they listen, or let's say I like that they'll argue, and there's a certain component to that. Like, yeah, I can answer most all of your rebuttals, and I get that you're not going to change your mind. But you have those arrogant people that think they know something and yet know nothing, and you know that they haven't done a lick of research, have no clue what they're talking about, and I go at them, and I'm going to ridicule you, and I'm going to make you look stupid because you are stupid, and you think that you're smart, and you haven't even looked into it. And I think that's the height of ignorance and arrogance. So I think that I know that on the spot they're not going to change their mind, but I feel like if I can ridicule them enough or nail them enough that perhaps they'll get a little bit angry and motivated to go read about it at least, or like, shit, maybe I am wrong. What do you think? I mean, do you think that argument style, like Mike? Do you think that argument style it's a bad idea? I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to go after them personally. It's never personal, but I'm going to say like you have no idea what you're talking about, or no, I'm not going to.
People don't like being ridiculed, Will, even if they're wrong. You can tell me I'm wrong. If you tell me I'm wrong nicely, I will be like, oh, well, maybe I should look into this. If you call me an idiot and you just bold on me, I'm going to get defensive.
No, I don't mean calling names, but I mean like bringing up arguments that actually just bringing up arguments that will topple theirs in a manner where it's like, you kidding me? You know what I mean? Like, no. Or I'm not saying I never go at them personally. I will never disparage any in that regard.
Right.
But I mean, like, if you're that arrogant, I'm gonna be like, no, this is why. You don't know what you really just don't know what you're talking about. You haven't studied it, and then I will just through my argument, not necessarily, you know what I mean. But I'm not gonna be like Mr. Like I'm here to like to coddle you like I would with someone else that's really just inquiring. Or making a valid argument against my position. I mean, like, totally invalid arguments coming from nowhere, just feeling an anger. And I you know what I mean?
Well, here's the problem. We live in a culture now where everybody is so afraid of arguing politics, where you have a right to your opinion, and so it doesn't. You can say what your opinion can be anything. It could be the worst opinion ever. You could say, the Bulls won the championship in 1955, and I could tell you the Bulls didn't exist in 1955. You'd be like, that's just my opinion. I'll be
right.
Like, but the thing about it is, it comes to a point where, you have to throw the facts out there. But I think one thing that people don't do is they're so settled into their opinion. They say, I have a right to my opinion. Me personally, I'm terrified of being wrong. So when I throw an opinion out there, I'm double checking my opinion. I'll change my opinion if it's wrong. I'm like, oh crap, I said something stupid. And I always bring up this example. I used to be for the gold standard, and after research, I realized I was wrong. I was like, holy crap, I spent 3 years talking about something that made no sense. But I don't think most people do that. They say, I have a right to my opinion, and that's their opinion, and that's that. There's no more looking into being worried about being wrong. They just have their opinion, and everybody has a right to that. So they don't care.
I hear that a lot. So sometimes, you give an argument, you put together a nice set of premises, you give some evidence, and then they give this one-line response. That's just your opinion.
Yeah.
Well, what type of response is that? How does that respond to the points I bring up?
This goes to, again, that morality and truth is subjective. I mean, literally, this is what academia teaches, Tim. I've been in it, I see it, and the modus operandi of postmodernism is to call everything that is a truth claim a construct, and then therefore deconstruct it. Mm-hmm. That includes gender. That I'm a man merely because society told me I'm a man. And all the elements that make me one are just socially constructed, and that there is no difference between me and a woman, and that there's more fluidity between. I am not kidding that we are the same thing. So I always say, when somebody makes this claim, I raise my hand and say to the teacher, is there fluidity when you date? Like, when you go date, does it matter if it's a man or a woman to you? Moreover, if there's fluidity and there's no difference, I'm pregnant and I'm doing 9 months. You know what I mean? It's like, this is the tenor of the leftist intellectuals. I mean, Rachel Maddow. They don't care what you present to them as it relates to capitalism. That's a construct, and it's socially created. And that's Marxist thought. That's literally the Marxist thought, that these are constructs. Capitalism was derived as a racist element or a conduit, literally, to steal the wealth or to steal labor from minorities. I mean, this is entrenched in academia. This is what they basically say. So I think that has taken seed and taken root with a lot of people on the left, and they just don't care about the facts. I mean, literally, if you were to ask somebody that you're debating, a leftist, well, what evidence do you have? They freak out. I love it. I love saying, what evidence do you have? Oh, what? Is my assessment incorrect, you think?
Oh, I mean, certainly a lot of people are relativists about truth, although nobody actually is consistent in this. They're only relativists when it works for them. So,
right.
If it's something that they care about, they're quick to give, arguments, the facts. But when you press them on a point they disagree with, they just dismiss everything you have to say by saying, that's just your opinion. Right,
and the thing that highlights this, and you guys will love this, is my teacher's a postmodernist, and I always say, so are you saying there is no truth? And he's like, yes, there is no truth. And I said, well, you just came up with a bunch of arguments. If there is no truth, how can you use logic or any sort of argumentation?
The point of sorry.
Go ahead. No, go, Tim. You're the expert.
The point of an argument is to convince other people. And if truth is something you just make up, then what's the point in engaging in debate? I mean, the point of a debate is to argue people towards the truth. And if there really is no such thing as the truth, then why do we even have schools to begin with?
I said on the first day, because I know him and he's a really great guy. I like him a lot. He's a bright guy. And he said on the first day, oh, there is no truth. I raised my hand. And I said, if there is no truth, can you get a running start and try to run through the door? I don't think that door exists, therefore it's not there. And, there is no truth, so nothing exists, nothing's happening. Please run through the wall. It's a matter of perception, literally, from the postmodernist standpoint. I said, sir, are you saying... Go ahead, Mike.
Saying there is no truth is the implication there is that that's the truth.
Exactly. No, it's a total
so how does that work?
It's a totally self-refuting claim. Aquinas points this out in some of his writing, that truth is self-evident. Because if you say there is no truth, you've made a truth claim, and you've already refuted your own conclusion. So you can't say, I mean, we can get into that all day. But I mean, in academia, this prevails. And in my classes, we have this thing called critical race theory, which talks about, you know what I'm talking about, right, Tim?
Yeah, the crazy stuff like that, basically.
Go ahead. Do you want to talk about it?
I want to hear Tim talk about that.
You got to hear this.
Well, I mean, it's just, all of these ideas are just, I try my best to even understand them, and sometimes I just can't even understand what they're saying.
It's impossible. I thought I was stupid. I'm like, I can't get this. This is just a lot of words and nothing. It's a word salad. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, look, they use all these big terms, and then, I read some of their writings, and you can try to make something out, but there's no coherent flow to these things, and sometimes a lot of postmodernist thought, quite frankly, even to somebody like me, makes absolutely no sense. It's no different from just utter gibberish.
And W.V. Quine makes that same argument. He with Foucault. I mean, he's just like, this is nothing. You're not saying anything. I mean, and it's. Go ahead.
In philosophy, you have, it's traditionally divided into these two camps. You have what's called analytic philosophy and continental philosophy.
Continental, yeah.
And analytic philosophers always strive for rigor, mathematical precision, getting your terms straight, whereas continental philosophers, many people don't think continental philosophy is actually philosophy at all, because when you look at it, it's basically obscurantism. They say, if you read somebody like Hegel, I try my best to understand somebody like Hegel. I can't understand Hegel. So, a lot of continental philosophy I mean, there's some valuable stuff to be learned from continental philosophy, but a lot of it is just utter obscurantism.
No, you're right. And I talked to a friend today who is a philosopher, works in academia, and I said to him, I just, for the life of me, because I like answers like Matt and Mike, and I'm very logical, and and I said, I just can't for the life of me get postmodernism. This is so crazy. He goes, look, you're never going to get it. It's just like trying to understand a contradiction. You can't do it. Do you know what I mean? And he's absolutely right. It's just self-refuting, and it seeks to only explain itself. And I think it's built off of Marxism, in my opinion, and the reason is to explain the failure of socialism. I think that's really what it does, is it elides purpose, it elides facts, and what it really tries to do is explain Marxist theory, is really classes, divisions, groups, these groups within capitalism, classes, these are all constructs, you see, and that the rich are stealing from the poor, and they have to create these class divisions and create this within these divisions, they create this angst and balkanization. And I mean, that's the only thing that this Marxist society can really thrive on. And I think it seeks to explain
create a victim mentality. It's always us against the other people. You create these classes. They're always fighting against each other. It really, I mean, if you look at how these ideologies play out, it's just not empirically confirmed. And they don't.
Not a shred of evidence is ever given.
And I guess so. I mean, back on your point about truth, the person who says there is no truth is basically telling you not to believe him. It's just self-refuting.
That's right. And Matt, when we go, let's say we look at inequality and differences. I mean, this is critical race theory is really about saying that whites have set up since Columbus till today this racial formation, saying that they built the country on white supremacy. Okay, and that the goal is that whites generally get their position from, I don't know, stealing wealth from labor. Yeah. Literally labor theory. I asked my teacher. He said, "Oh, capitalists stole the labor," and I mean, he said that. I said, "So are you saying labor theory is actually a thing?" And he said, "Yes."
They're assuming that this labor would even exist if it wasn't for capitalism. I mean, it's like.
But what they say is, can you draw a link? What they say is the common claim is that slavery led to capitalism. That slavery was a part of capitalism. Is there any truth to that claim, or is it actually closer to socialism or expropriation?
I don't know where the passage in the Wealth of Nations is that says like we're going to go in. Where is that in the Wealth of Nations? It's sure it existed alongside capitalism, but just because they exist at the same time doesn't mean they're one and the same. Like it doesn't make any sense.
Now, I'm not saying, when we say this, I'm not saying there has been explicit policies from the government, whether it's the Supreme Court, the executive branch, or Congress, that have been racist. Yeah. There is no doubt about that. But that didn't come from the free market system. Mm-hmm. On the contrary, if you look at market systems before FDR's FHA loans and his Public Works Administration, which had explicitly racist policies in the 30s for housing, you had largely integrated neighborhoods. Until the FHA started to create public housing and give concessionary loans to people based on the fact of their race, largely white people. That's where Levittown come from. They received concessionary loans or subsidized loans from the government to have white people move in, and this largely created ghettos. But people will blame capitalism for it. Mike, do you see a lot of this? I mean, I know on Being Liberal Logic you're engaged, I don't know how many, probably a ton of trolls. But I mean, is there any evidence to suggest that capitalism itself is to blame? And is there any credible evidence to the fact of labor theory?
Well, there's definitely no evidence to suggest that slave. Well, are you saying is there evidence to suggest that capitalism was created for slavery?
Well, slavery was the nascent beginnings of capitalism. You see, that's where it began. Yeah.
I mean, slavery began what? 10,000 years before the Wealth of Nations was ever written. So I mean,
but just slavery. It's hard to argue from their. It's just too funny. But no, slavery in the United States because Columbus imported it, and that's like the white capitalist, white supremacy notion of capitalism, and it was to subjugate the natives.
Didn't Columbus land in the United States about 200 years before the Wealth of Nations was written?
No. He landed about 30 years ago, and he's.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong, but Columbus was the one that killed all the Indians, correct?
Yes, he wiped them out genocidal with his blunderbuss.
You're right.
Yes.
No, I mean it's goofy, man, and no, I mean the labor theory of value, and Matt alluded to it, is even more hilarious because how does one, like, okay, if we're going to prescribe the labor theory of value, then anybody that goes out and does anything, I can take a spoon, I can go outside, and I can start digging a hole. And that means that my labor must be creating something of value for everybody, right? Because I'm going through this rough laborious process. Therefore, I'm creating value, correct?
Yep. By that logic, the less efficient you are, the more value you're creating.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
well, you know what sucks, guys, is that I go to the gym every day and work out, and I pay them.
Yeah. Why aren't they paying you to be there? That is slavery. That is slavery.
I actually pay. That's lower than slave wages when I go to the gym. But anyway, Tim, there are disparities amongst groups. We understand that. But if you want to explain it from the postmodernist standpoint, or the standpoint that there is no truth, why is it that Asians and Jews tend to outperform whites? Is that because somehow the whites like Asians and Jews all of a sudden, or is it just that like the whites see that, oh, let's go after the blacks, but not after Asians? I don't understand how that happens. Could it be cultural differences? What's going on? Is it white supremacy? I mean, this is an actual thing. This prevails in academia and amongst the intelligentsia. So, I mean, we see it, we laugh at it, but people take this seriously. I mean, what would explain disparities to you if you were to look at it? I mean, is white supremacy an explanation, and where do they derive their evidence from?
You know, this is something I haven't really done much research on, so I can't really comment much on these differences between various racial groups.
Right.
So, I mean, I'm not aware of the various reasons that liberal thinkers believe in this.
It's the same reasons why they think people don't have a moral right to own guns. You know what I mean? It's just, they just say stuff, and based on, you know, whatever their preconceived notions are. You know what I mean? And Thomas Sowell has proven in volumes, and certain other and Matt knows this, that it's cultural differences that really create disparities, and that's really the natural order of mankind throughout millennia, is that people living in certain areas tend to have differing skills as it relates to their human capital that are derived from their cultural experiences. Matty, would that explain these disparities to you? And is that largely the problem with guns, is cultural problems within different communities?
I know that, like, if you look at where most gun crimes are concentrated, it's in statistical metropolitan areas with 250,000 or more people. I don't know if I'd say that's cultural, but that's where most gun homicides tend to be concentrated. And we have something like 150 areas in the United States that meet that criteria, but the UK has 12. So
right.
I don't know if I would call it cultural, but that, I think, to some extent could explain why we have why we tend to have more gun crime than other neighborhoods.
Well, it also, would you agree that a lot of these gun crimes happen in lower income neighborhoods?
Oh yeah, the vast majority do. And actually, most people in most cities that are killed by guns have prior criminal records. So a lot of it's due to the war on drugs. A lot of it's gang violence. There's that as well.
Right, and and I mean, not only for the reasons why they're low income or they're not making a amount of money, could be due to cultural differences or subcultures.
Of course.
As well as why, gun violence prevails, gang violence, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, actually, one example comes to mind. Everyone looks at Japan and says, well, they have no guns, they have no gun crime. The Japanese who live in America have a lower firearm homicide rate than those living in Japan, so it's almost certainly cultural.
Right. So there are these cultures. They look at people. They look at people as if everybody's the same. That abstract people in an abstract world, right? But relatively look at cultural differences. I hate that. Yeah. I really do. Tim, do you think? Here's a question I've always wanted to ask a philosopher. Do you think you could be a good economist or a good political scientist without first understanding what undergirds truth?
Probably not.
Okay.
All of these, all of the economic stuff presupposes a certain understanding of what man is, certain assumptions about human nature, and if you don't have the right assumptions, then you'll start off from the wrong economic perspective, and you end up with people like Marx, who started from the wrong conception of human nature and ended up with very disastrous economic policy. So the economic stuff follows from the social stuff.
And I mean, Thomas Sowell wrote a book called The Conflict of Visions, and Matt would know it, and I'm pretty sure Mike knows it. And he literally, I mean, he kind of simplified continental and analytical thinking, gave the analytical thinking the nomenclature of the constrained vision, and gave the continental thinking the nomenclature of the unconstrained vision, and really kind of parses it out. He does an excellent job in A Conflict of Visions. Tim, I don't know if you read that.
I haven't read much of Sowell, so I can't comment on that.
Oh, he does an excellent job, and he's one of the few economists that understand philosophy and the civil society and things like that. So some of his conclusions are different than other economists on certain things, like certainly the benefits and costs of immigration. His are largely different than, say, his contemporaries at Cato.
If you want an economist or an author that can venture outside of the economic realm and talk about all these topics and have a great understanding of all of them together, you have to read him. He's probably the best, in my opinion.
No doubt. I think so, too. Yeah, and I think Hayek, to a degree, was great on law. I think there's very few economists that really ventured out and didn't draw their conclusions largely from just their economic methodological precepts. You know what I mean? I don't think...
And I love Friedman, but Friedman can't venture out the same way that
no.
So that's a great reason that if you want to read an economist that can talk with command on all these subjects, he's
right.
got to be the best.
I always thought, Tim, that it was hard for an economist to make a claim about the benefits of capitalism and call capitalism a better system to allocate scarce resources with alternative uses than socialism if you don't understand morality first. I mean, you've just made a moral claim, correct?
I mean, this idea of better, worse,
right.
Presupposes certain assumptions about morality. You can't say this economic policy is a good economic policy unless you know how we should structure society, what policies are good for human beings, what leads to human flourishing. So a lot of economic policy depends on this idea or prior understanding of morality, and so you can't be a good economist without at least knowing something about morality.
Right, because I notice a lot of libertarians will make claims and then never back it up with a sufficient argument. I'm not saying that their claims are incorrect. I would agree with a lot of their claims. I think what bothers me most is that they don't have a sufficient argument to undergird those claims, and they tend to do mental gymnastics to get around really giving you any sort of definitive answer. And that's fine, because look, philosophy is not I don't think is a necessarily easy thing to engage in. If somebody wanted to learn philosophy, Tim, where would be a good place to start?
I mean, you could start just from reading just the ancient philosophers, so Plato and Aristotle, although Plato and Aristotle are very hard to read. And so,
right. Is there anywhere easier that they can go to learn about Aristotle, for instance?
You could probably read his commenters, or you could just probably pick up an introductory philosophy textbook and get it from that. Although I would hesitate from doing that because a lot of
right.
these introductory texts are written by people who have an agenda. And so if you want the unfiltered Aristotle or the unfiltered Plato, your best bet would probably be to read an anthology where you have certain parts selected that are the relevant parts of the work, and then you have a commentary, and then so I guess a historical understanding or a historical approach to philosophy would be not just a good way of understanding philosophy, but a way of understanding just the rich tradition of ideas that has led to what we have today.
What do you consider Locke's impact on truth and natural law? I mean, he's making a lot of naturalistic claims. I think he's moving away. I would call them metaphysical claims. You call them naturalistic claims, only so far as you have to use metaphysics, I think, to really truly justify them. I don't think the naturalistic argument's sufficient.
Right.
Though it is a good argument.
When you talk about natural law, there's a lot of different kinds of natural law. So you've got
Aquinas had his, yeah.
Aquinas' natural law. You've got Cicero's natural law. You've got
right.
Locke's natural law. You've got some views that are called natural law, which technically don't look anything like natural law. You've got people like Hobbes, who are sometimes called natural law thinkers, although it's not really natural law in the traditional sense. Locke's version of natural law is not Aquinas' version of natural law. So Aquinas' version of natural law is rooted more in this idea of human nature, proper functioning, whereas Locke bases his natural law on basically God. And so we have our rights because God gave them to us, and from there he derives his political theory. Whereas on Aquinas' view, God does play a role, but what primarily does the work is this idea of a human nature and proper functioning, and that's where you get Aquinas' idea of natural law and natural rights from.
So his is more of a teleological standpoint
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, people like Locke, if you read Locke and his other writings, so his stuff on metaphysics and epistemology, he tries to do away with this scholastic idea of essences, of teleology. He tries to do away with that.
Would you agree that that's a push away from the institution of the Catholic Church by Enlightenment thinkers? I mean, they were trying to move away from the Church as a whole, I think the Catholic Church specifically, and get into that more mechanistic and naturalistic arguments, and away from teleology.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the rejection of, I mean, I'm not Catholic myself, actually. I'm a Protestant scholastic which is rather rare these days.
That is rare,
but,
yes. I would have assumed Catholic, yeah. Go ahead.
But the rejection of scholastic thought does have, you could explain it in terms of some political rejection of the Catholic Church, or just a general revolt against the Catholic Church. And so some of it might be philosophically motivated.
Right.
That might play into it. I think the whole rejection of the scholastic way of thinking was a very big mistake.
Right,
and,
I agree. I couldn't agree more. Yes, I think that's one of the biggest things to happen, was the rejection of scholastic thinking. I wanted to move on. I wanted to get a little debate segment in here, and I'll start with you, Tim. Did you watch any of the debate? How into politics
the Republican debate?
Yes.
Yeah, the most recent one. Yeah, I watched all of them. So.
Who was your perceived winner?
So it would probably be either Cruz or Rubio who did the best.
Okay, why Cruz or Rubio? Be specific.
So Cruz's attack on when I don't know who the moderators were again when they asked him that question, and Cruz had a pretty good comeback for that. And as for Rubio, he was a great speaker. He dismantled Jeb Bush's critique of his voting record rather well. And actually, after that, Jeb Bush didn't. His ratings and his perception basically just fell, and people are saying he's no longer a viable candidate. But Rubio was a great speaker. Christie also had a few good moments too, and in general, I think everybody did rather well. There was they all united against the moderators, which instead of attacking each other, I guess they attacked the moderators, and so. That's basically what I got out of the debate.
Okay.
It certainly wasn't like the other two debates.
Right.
My impression of the moderators is that you had something. It was very unfair. They were asking rather loaded questions. They were almost trying to debate the people on stage instead of actually asking them questions. And CNBC got a lot of flack for that after the debate.
Right. That's a good assessment. Matty, I know you love politics. I know you love the debates. I hope you watched.
I did watch it, yeah.
What was your take on the debate?
I think everyone except Jeb Bush won, to be honest.
Jeb Bush did do a terrible job, though.
Yeah,
terrible.
I don't know. I think if you notice with the moderators, though, they almost try to make the debate about themselves. Like when I think Harwood was asking Carson about his tax plan or something, and he was, the economist I spoke to say, like, as if it's all about him. He's the one who's coming up with this. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, so he said something about the tax foundation, about Marco Rubio's tax plan.
And
he was corrected by the CEO on Twitter. It's almost as if they were pulling facts out of just nowhere. I mean, a lot of what they said was just demonstrably false.
There are no facts, guys.
It was an error that he apologized for 2 weeks before the debate that he repeated. Rubio pointed out that he apologized for the error in the past, and he denied it. And then the president came out and said, "No, you're wrong." So.
Who would your perceived winner be of that? If you had to pick one winner.
One? I think probably Ted Cruz, just based on I think he was kind of him who brought together everyone against the media.
I mean, really, the Republicans came together, they coalesced around one another, and they hammered those moderators.
And it wasn't all about Trump, which was nice.
Right, which is true. They didn't take the question. They tried to make it about Trump when they asked Huckabee that question about Does Trump have the
A
moral
moral character, yeah.
right? And he's like, "Why are you at what?" And he finally
Yeah.
had enough. I think he was brilliant on that one. Mike, I know that you love this as much as I do. What do you think? Let me ask you one pointed question. What do you think of John Kasich?
I think John Kasich's a complete nut job, but
Why?
I mean, basically everything. John Kasich can make that. John Kasich makes no sense when he talks about Social Security and Medicaid. John Kasich makes no sense. He's in complete denial. The only good moment that John Kasich had in the entire debate was when Trump tried to tell him that the only reason Ohio had whatever recovery was because they struck oil. Well, that was because John Kasich allowed the state of Ohio to engage in fracking. Maybe if there was a businessman in New York that petitioned the government to allow fracking in New York, maybe New York could receive a better revenue. That was the only good moment Kasich had. He's completely unaware of any facts ever. He just
ranted.
He's up there. He's flailing his arms around and he's talking about all this stuff.
Around, his hands are flapping.
Half the time, what he says isn't making any sense, which is most of the time actually. And B, you can look it up later, and it was just completely false. He just made it up.
I just love ripping on John Kasich. He's my new Jeb Bush because Jeb Bush has looked so pathetic that I feel bad making fun of him at this point. That line on Rubio, I mean, literally. What is this? A 3-day work week? What the?
He apologized.
Rubio absolutely
that comment.
Destroyed Jeb Bush.
And
Rubio wiped the floor with Jeb Bush. That was over after that.
Especially when Rubio was like, "So I know someone convinced you that attacking me was a good idea."
That's exactly it. That was the exact thought I had. It's like somebody in his campaign, and then he said it.
Yeah. That was great.
He nailed that line. But if you had a perceived winner, Mike, who would you perceive that to be?
I would definitely say, and you can look at the polls and the internet searches to back this up, that the winner was Rubio. In my mind, it was either Rubio or Cruz.
Mm-hmm.
But from the reaction to the debate, it was definitely Rubio. I think he did have the strongest debate. Cruz also had a strong debate. Rand Paul was silent again. I don't think Rand Paul is honestly that good at being a debater. So, but yeah, it has to be Cruz or Rubio had the best night for sure.
I mean, I thought at the beginning that Cruz and Rand had the best shot at winning this thing. I'd have to throw Rubio in there now, but Rand has just done a horrible job campaigning. Go ahead.
Christie had a strong night because Huckabee was arguing, and this is Christie's one strong area, is Social Security reform, Medicaid reform. This is the one area where Chris Christie's in his zone, and Huckabee kept hammering this stupid argument that Huckabee had. Huckabee's in complete denial of what the situation with Social Security.
I agree with you.
And since he kept having to argue with Christie about this subject, it made Christie look really good. If you bring up any other subject with Christie, he wouldn't look quite as strong as he looked. But he kept having a debate with Huckabee, who was completely clueless about it, and that made Christie look good.
But here's the thing: Christie was right, I'm going to play devil's advocate and defend Huckabee here for a second. He is right that, morally speaking, they paid into the system, and that they deserve to get their money back. But I'll tell you why they don't deserve to get their money back. It's because they set this damn system up. They didn't do anything about it. That age group, we're subsidizing them now. You know what I mean? Now they're robbing from us. We don't want it to continue anymore. That money is gone. It is gone. So he's right, but I understand Huckabee saying that there was a promise, the government made a promise to pay these people their money back. I do agree with you ultimately that, yes, Christie's correct. But
yeah, Huckabee makes a case that, you can't say he's wrong. There's no way to say that he's wrong.
You're right, yeah.
But at the same time, he's way out of line. I mean, Christie was hammering him about this with the same exact points you just did.
Right.
Regardless of that,
right,
the system's broke, and it's mostly this generation that created the broke system to begin with. So if you're in denial that we need to change it just because we promise, there's a lot of things that you can promise that don't end up well, and you have to change your promise. I might promise you to show up at your house tomorrow, but if I get sick, I might have to break my promise. So a promise isn't a logical reason to continue with something.
No, you have a good point, and that definitely was Christie's strongest point. Matty, what do you see Rand's chances are at this point? And then I'll get to Tim.
Negative.
Oh. I mean, you would say, I just don't understand this. Let me answer this for me too.
Yeah.
Libertarians are so ideologically tethered to Rand Paul that they can't look. Cruz is no good because Cruz missed 30% of his votes, or Cruz is too religious, or Cruz. I don't understand. It's like they can't get off of Rand Paul. Rand Paul hasn't been the stalwart libertarian either, nor a stalwart conservative. He supported Mitch McConnell many times. Mitch McConnell is literally the bane of our problems. Why are these libertarians so adhered to Rand? I love Rand Paul. I'd love for him to be the president. He's one of my guys.
I guess he's the best on the ideological purity test. He's less of a heretic than the other people, apparently. I don't know.
I see these they'll bash Cruz at the expense of Rand Paul. They'll bash anyone at the expense of Rand Paul. I don't see that from Mike. I don't see that from you. I just don't understand. I don't understand why that is. Tim, what do you give? I don't know how in-depth you follow it, but what chances do you give Rand Paul? I'm kind of eating my words here because a few months ago I had said that Rand Paul is going to have a legitimate shot at winning this thing, and I think that's crumbling every month, though it is still early. Go ahead.
I would have thought he would have dropped out by now. I don't think he's got much of a chance. And libertarians are attracted to him. They were attracted to his father, like I said, like Matt said, because of this purity test. He's most libertarian out of all the other people, and so I guess that's why they stick with him, even though he's not that pure of a libertarian.
Right. Now, this is all interesting stuff. We're about 5 minutes over. Again, I want to thank Tim Hsiao for coming on. Where can they find your paper, the paper that you and Matt had done together?
Right now it's behind a paywall, but
it is, okay.
Yeah, it's behind one of those dumb academic paywalls you have to get a university subscription to. But I guess you might be able to put it. Matt has proofs. I have proofs. I guess we could put it up on Dropbox or something like that. And
okay, well, I'm sure a lot of the people watching the show also have. Is it on JSTOR? They probably also have,
I tried to access it through my own university, and my university didn't have the database access.
Oh, wow, okay.
So,
all right.
But I do have a PDF proof, and we can find a way to upload that. Although I'm not sure what the copyright situation is with regards to that.
Stupid IP.
Yeah,
anyway. That's cool. So, Matty, for being classically liberal, maybe you could put a post and put some of the stuff up on there.
Sure. I do have another paper that is freely available online. Just go to timhsiao.org, and under papers it should be there. So
so you have your own website.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So timhsiao.org, and you have your work there. That's great. I didn't know that. Okay. And for Mike Lee, who is at Being Liberal Logic, have you started posting again yet, Mike?
I'm working on one right now, so that's going to be out tomorrow. So.
Wow. Okay. And for myself, from Unbiased America and the Analytical Conservative, which is it's sadly starting to die off because it's hard for me to post there. I also have my personal Will Ricciardella page. You can follow me there. I put up little pithy observations. Thanks for watching, and watch us next week. We have Mary Roward on, I believe, next week. PhD, biologist, big in the libertarian movement. You can check it. Just Google her name. She's out there, and I'm sure you'll love the show. I know there were things that Liberty.me wanted me to plug, but I don't have the email in front of me. I'm sorry, Mike.
I bet one of them is Politics After Dark. So
Politics After Dark. Politics After Dark. Watch it. It's a good show. I know there was a show with Jeff Tucker coming on, and just go to Liberty.me. The Google Plus page is great. So if you go to the Google Plus, Liberty.me, Google Plus, what is it? Google Plus? That one where you like where you make friends on there. What's that thing called? I forgot what it's.
I don't know.
No, Google Plus or something.
I know, I'm just messing with you.
It's but Liberty.me Facebook page too, and the Liberty.me, obviously Liberty.me, and join, sign up, do what you got to do. That's where our show is. Again, I want to thank Tim. Tim, hold on, don't leave, and thank you everybody. And Matt looks really great with his new haircut. Mike's face is still questionable. He could probably use some professional work, and by professional work I mean a surgeon. Thank you.